I'm not a good person. There is really no other way for me to say that. I'm okay with that at this point in my life. My whole life has been very hard, and sadly, I played the hand I was given. I'm not looking for sympathy either. It is what it is. So, with that being said, I hope you understand why I'm telling this story anonymously. It's hard to believe now, but this story I'm about to tell happened to me almost 20 years ago. Back in the early 2000s, I was the worst version of myself. I was always getting into trouble. You name it, robbery, fighting, grand theft auto. The list goes on. There was this one terrible night where I came very close to getting what I deserved. Back then, there was about a 6-month period when I played this little game. I would drive to a different small town in the middle of nowhere every few days. Because I never stayed in one place for long, finding these little towns was very easy. There are countless small towns in the United States. When I arrived in these towns, I would spend some time looking around the area and finding an old couple. My target couple would always be old and weak looking. It's hard to explain, but they also had seemed mentally weak. I know that sounds unclear, but part of my trick depended on them being mentally weak as well as physically weak. Once I found the perfect couple, I would wait until it got dark, but not too late. Usually around 9 p.m. was the time I made my move. That's when I would suddenly show up at these old people's doors, begging for help. I would point at my car on the road and claim it had broken down. I would make up some weak excuse like my wife was in the hospital about to give birth, and I needed a phone right away to call for help. Once the old people invited me inside, I would tie them up and rob them completely. I never stole anything sentimental, and I did my absolute best not to hurt the old people. Hurting them was never part of the game. I only wanted to rob them. Now that you all know what a terrible person I was, I'll tell you about the night when this little game almost cost me my life. It started just like all the others. I found my targets and got ready for the robbery. I parked my car in front of the house a little after 9 p.m. I planned to tell the old couple my usual story that my wife was pregnant and the car died. Sadly, this story worked every time. The location is important in this story, so I'll try to describe it the best I can. The house was basically the only house on that road. I think the next closest house was about a 3-minute drive away. The front of the house was almost right on the road. There wasn't much of a driveway. They had one old pickup truck, but it was parked beside the house in the grass. Behind the house were woods as far as you could see. Knowing the area was an important part of my trick, because if things went wrong, I needed to know the best escape route. Since this house didn't really have much of a front yard or driveway, my escape plan was simple. At least I thought it was. I put on my fake worried face and ran to the door. I started knocking and screaming for help. An old woman answered the door. She didn't look scared or worried at all. With almost no urgency, she asked what the problem was. I started quickly explaining that my wife was in the hospital about to give birth to our first child, and my car had broken down. I needed to call someone for help. The woman smiled. It was a rough smile. She didn't have many teeth. She grabbed my shoulder and told me to come in. The woman's behavior made me nervous. Usually, the people I'm robbing at this point are panicking and trying to help however they can, but not this woman. She happily guided me inside and told me to stand in the living room, which was a room right beside the front door. In a creepy voice, she told me not to worry and that I would be okay. Right then, this huge man walked into the room. I'm exaggerating a little when I say huge, but he was massive. I would guess he was well over 6 feet tall and easily 400 pounds. He had a thick black beard sticking out from his face about 3 inches. But the two most important things about this large man were that he was holding a hunting rifle in his hand, and he was not old. This man couldn't have been older than 25 or maybe 30 years old. Younger people were not as easy to trick with my game, so this was a huge mistake on my part. The woman spoke up and told me that this was her son, and he would go outside and check my car. Before I could even say anything, she shouted, "Hank!" at the top of her lungs. She started telling me that her husband Hank was in the other room, and he would definitely help me. She kept yelling for Hank, and at the same time, her son went outside. I started to panic a little because her son would clearly see that my car was perfectly fine, and I didn't think running away right then was the best idea since he was walking around with that rifle in his hands. Hank limped into the living room where I was standing, and then he just stared at me. The old woman said something about helping me, and Hank just mumbled something quietly under his breath. This is when I noticed the smell. Everything happened so fast once I got to the door that I didn't realize the smell inside the house was horrible. Like really, really horrible. It wasn't a smell of body odor. It was something else, something worse. And that's when I decided it was time to leave. I started slowly moving toward the door, and I saw Hank copying my movements toward the door. The old woman was also slowly getting closer to me and asking where I was going. She kept asking me what was wrong and asking if I still wanted their help. I made up a stupid excuse and told them I needed to get something from my car. Both of them were getting closer to me. When I was about 6 feet from the front door, I made a sudden move and sprinted the rest of the way. As I ran, I felt Hank try to grab me, but thankfully, I was young enough to slip away quickly. For a split second, I forgot about their son outside. That intense moment inside had my blood pumping, and escaping was the only thing on my mind. When I got to the car, I noticed that all 4 tires had been completely flattened. As I ran closer and checked the tires, I could clearly tell they had been slashed. I didn't know what to do or what was happening. I didn't see their son, but I heard Hank yell from the house that I was outside, and that couldn't have gotten far. I decided to run into the woods. I know that's a cliche, but hiding in the dark would seem like a better idea than running on an open road. I sprinted deep into the woods for a minute or two, and then hid behind a big tree to catch my breath. I got low to the ground and did my best to listen for footsteps. Not long after, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming toward me. I couldn't move because that would clearly give away my hiding spot. I was holding my breath and trying my best not to move a single muscle. The footsteps were getting louder and sounded like they were right on top of me. I looked to my side, and 2 feet from my head was the old couple's son walking past me, swinging the hunting rifle in his hand. I think the only reason he didn't hear me was because his heavy footsteps were so loud. I could feel myself shaking as he walked by me. Somehow, he didn't see me and just kept walking into the darkness. I waited for him to disappear, and then I basically crawled out of the woods. When I got back to the house, I quietly snuck back to my car. I could see through the windows that the old woman was just standing there looking outside toward the woods. Somehow, she didn't see me. I didn't see Hank, which made me think he was still in the woods. Also, I decided to do the dumbest thing ever, and I still can't believe it worked. I got into my car with the flat tires, and I basically rolled down the road as far as I could before the tires were completely ruined. Once I could hear them scraping against the ground, I got out of the car and ran as fast as I could back to town. It took me a while, but I made it. I eventually got someone to tow the car away from there. And I didn't tell them or the police about the old people. I didn't want anyone digging too deeply into my life. Once I escaped and got the car towed, I never wanted to think about those people again. I don't really know for sure what happened that night. I know what I felt and I know what I saw. The body language, the smell, the slashed tires, everything adds up to something bad. I saw this experience as karma from a universe giving me the middle finger. I did somewhat clean up my life after this experience, but I definitely didn't become a saint. I'm still a bad person because of my past. I'm just not as bad as I used to be, and I do feel regret and guilt for many things I've done. Honestly, though, I think whatever those people were doing was far worse than what I was out there doing. I've never shared this full story before because I don't like how it makes me look. Basically, I spent a little over a year being a criminal. I worked as an overnight security guard for a large strip mall in my hometown. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to mention the name of my hometown, the mall, or anything else that could possibly get me into trouble. For the first few months, I took my job very seriously. Once I learned the area well, I realized how unbelievably boring my job was. At first, it felt like a dream job. I'm a night owl, so staying up all night was normal for me. I also don't really like people, and this job had almost zero human interaction. I would watch the security cameras, make a few nightly walks around the mall, and basically listen to podcasts or watch shows on my phone all night. Honestly, This got old much faster than I thought it would. The boredom got to me. I needed something to make my life feel exciting. Most of my life up to that point, I had never gotten into trouble. I wasn't a bad kid, and for all my adult life up to then, I had never even gotten a traffic ticket. One night, while watching the cameras, I noticed that one of the back doors didn't have a camera near it. I don't know how that could happen, but I was happy it did. I should explain the layout of this strip mall. Just like any other strip mall, the stores were lined up in the front. What was interesting about this mall was that behind every store was a large back room that connected all the stores to the security office. From the office, I had access to every store. So, even though the front doors were locked, I could still get into the stores through the back rooms. After discovering that back door with no camera, it got me thinking. I wondered where all the other blind spots were. I started paying closer attention to cameras and writing down all the blind spots I could find. During my nightly walks, I would stand in some of these blind spots and do something silly like a dance move. Then when I returned to the office, I would replay the footage to see if the cameras caught me dancing. If they didn't, then I knew the spot was truly blind. And I wrote the exact location down on my phone. Once I found every blind spot, the boredom returned again. I started thinking about ways I could use these blind spots with the back door. I started small. I went into one of the stores and took a hat from a rack in a blind spot. I opened the back door and placed the hat in a box outside the door. When I left that morning, I drove around back and picked up the box. The next night, when I came back to work, I replayed the footage from when I took the hat. And when I watched it, there was no video of me at all. I convinced myself that I had mastered stealing just like that. And that's exactly what I did for a long time. At some point during the shift, I would steal something simply because I could. Sometimes it was something small, like a cheap t-shirt, and other times it was something much more valuable, like an expensive pair of sneakers. I understand that these stores obviously keep track of inventory, so I was careful and organized with what I stole. I apologize for the long setup, but I think it's important to understand my job and what I was doing there for the full story. One night while making my rounds, I heard something. This was the first time anything unusual had ever happened. The only crime that ever happened during my shift was the crime I committed myself. The sound was like children laughing. I pulled out my flashlight and searched the area. I didn't see anyone. I could hear laughter all around me, and whispers too, but the whispers made no sense. I started yelling for them to come out, but nobody appeared. I could hear movement and laughter, but I couldn't see anything. The worst part of all this was that the sounds were all around me, and I still couldn't see anyone. I felt crazy. I shouted that I was going to call the police like the tough security guard I was pretending to be, and the laughing stopped for a second, but then it started again. I ran out of the store and back to the office. I pulled up the security footage and saw nothing. All you can see in the footage is me waving my flashlight around like an idiot and yelling at nothing. I didn't call the police because my plan was to catch these kids when they tried to leave. I may know where all the blind spots are, but I knew there was no way these kids knew them. I opened all the camera feeds for that store and watched them all night. And surprisingly, I saw nothing the entire night. Close to sunrise, I went back to the store and looked around, but I found no signs of kids or break-ins. I convinced myself that my mind was playing tricks on me and decided to move on from it. I had the next 2 nights off. When I went back to work, I asked the guy leaving as I clocked in if anything strange had happened during the last 2 nights, and he said no. That night, I decided I would check out that store again and maybe steal a little something for myself. When I got to the store around 3 o'clock in the morning, I walked to the sneaker section, and as I grabbed a new pair of Vans, I heard something rush past me. I froze because any unexpected noise is scary in that kind of situation. I shouted, "Who's there?" But the only answer I got was the same teasing laughter again. I ran out of the aisle, still holding the Vans in my hands. Once again, I shined my flashlight all over the store. And again, I didn't see anything. I was shouting and moving around wildly. I was still holding the sneakers in one hand and the flashlight in the other. As I aggressively walked through the store, I made my way to one of the corners. Then I saw something move from the corner of my eye. I looked down the aisle to my left and shouted. I saw a small figure step out from the back of the aisle and wave at me. I tried shining my flashlight at them, but they were too far away. It only looked like a dark shadow. I told them to stay there, and I started running toward them. I looked away from the shadow for 1 second, and they were gone. I started running around that area like a crazy person shouting, but I couldn't find them again. I could still hear laughter and running all around me, though. Then I heard one of the voices clearly say my full name. At that point, I had enough. I wanted nothing to do with being in that store anymore. I ran back to the security office. I didn't even realize through all the confusion that I still had the vans in my hand. I set them down in the office and told myself I would return them in the morning. Right now, I just wanted to check the footage and catch whoever these kids were that were messing with me. I watched every second of the footage, and not once could you see anything except me running around. I looked insane. The craziest part was that there was a camera facing the aisle where I saw the kid, but in the footage, nobody was there. I don't know if it was just too dark or what, but there was no sign of anyone. That morning, when my supervisor arrived and I told her about the previous night and the night from 2 days earlier, she replayed the footage and only saw me running around like an idiot. She also saw the vans in the office and asked why I had them there in the first place. I didn't have a real answer for her. I could tell she was becoming suspicious of me. She told me that some stores had reported theft and that the vans in my office and my strange behavior didn't look good. I kept trying to explain that I wasn't acting strange and that there really was someone in the store. I told her they even knew my name, but she didn't believe me. She basically accused me of stealing right there, and I denied it. I quit right then because I thought that if I no longer worked there, I couldn't get in trouble for stealing. I don't know why I believed that. They ended up investigating the thefts, not the possible intruders I reported. Somehow, I never got caught and nobody was arrested. When I think about this experience, I wonder if maybe I'm crazy and was seeing things that weren't really there. I also don't have any history of seeing or hearing things like that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since then. I know what I saw. I know I can't prove it. And I know it sounds insane, but I know I saw someone standing there. I know someone was messing with me. I just can't believe they knew my name. Dear Mr. Nightmare, I've been watching your videos, and the stories you've told reminded me of myself and something I once did. I'm not proud of it, but I think your viewers would find it interesting to hear a story from a bad guy's point of view. For that reason, I'll obviously stay anonymous. So, I wouldn't say I was a bad person before this. I mostly kept to myself, went to class, did what I had to do, and went home. I have always been socially awkward, and I didn't really have friends, but it never bothered me much because that was normal for me during my school years. Then one day, I got paired with a girl for a class presentation. I'll call her Emily. She was normal and easy to talk to, the kind of person who made group work enjoyable. The first time we met in the library, we worked on the outline for about an hour, but I found myself paying attention to things that had nothing to do with the project. Small things about her and the way she talked and wrote. I instantly realized I liked her. After that, we exchanged numbers to stay in touch about the presentation, and that should have been the end of it. That night, I searched for her online. It wasn't hard to find her after saving her number, because I could see her Snapchat profile through my contacts, which is how I learned her name. Within a few minutes, I found her Instagram too, and from there it just kept going. I thought it was harmless. I was just curious because honestly, this was the first real interaction I had with a girl in a long time, and I was obsessed with her. I scrolled through her photos. I saw where she went, who she spent time with, and I started noticing details in the background that helped me figure things out. It turned into me checking her accounts constantly, like it had become part of my daily routine. Within a few days, I had a pretty good idea of what neighborhood she lived in. I crossed the line when I searched how to find someone's address using their phone number, and I realized how easy it was. When I found it, I drove past her house once. Then I turned around and slowed down. There was a light on upstairs, and I wondered if it was her bedroom. I noticed a red car parked in front of the house that I was pretty sure belonged to her because it had a parking sticker from our college on the side window. I should have stopped there, but I became addicted to stalking this girl. It turned into something I did a few nights every week. I always stayed inside the car and told myself I wasn't crossing a line, even though I clearly already had. One night, I was parked a little farther down the street and noticed the blinds in the upstairs window move slightly. I saw someone peeking out the window. I couldn't tell if it was her, but it was definitely someone watching outside. I started panicking, thinking she or a family member had noticed me and figured out what I was doing. I left immediately, probably making it look even more suspicious. And the whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day in class, Emily acted completely normal, but at one point, she made a comment that made my heart sink. She casually mentioned that some boys at school were creepy and that she was dealing with a stalker situation. I didn't ask her to explain more because I was terrified she was talking about me. After that, I stopped going near her house. I stopped checking her profile as much too. I was convinced she might have figured it out, and I didn't want to push things further. Now, here's where things really started messing with my mind. At the time, I was living in my grandparents' house. It had been passed down to my parents after both of my grandparents died, and I still live here now. So I was alone. I was in my room around 9 o'clock at night, and I heard something outside, like a light tap against the window. I don't mean someone tapping their finger on the glass in a creepy way. I mean, it sounded like someone brushing against the glass while trying to look inside. I was too scared to go check. Though, the next night, it happened again, but this time it sounded like it came from a different side of the house. That's when I knew it wasn't a coincidence. And it only got worse. I started seeing shapes through the blinds, someone standing too close to the window. It was never clear enough to see who it was, just enough to know there was a person or maybe multiple people circling my house. I stopped opening the blinds completely after that. I stayed in my room with the door locked and the lights off. This continued for days. I stopped going to class completely. I barely left my room unless I absolutely had to. There was a person or group of people trying to see if I was home. I started using my little bit of money to order food and other things because I didn't want to leave the house. Every sound made me feel like someone was standing right outside. During all of this, Emily started texting me, asking if I was okay since I hadn't come to class or replied about the project. I didn't answer right away, but eventually I replied and told her I was sorry and asked her to please stop sending people to my house. The moment I sent it, I regretted it. Her reply came a few minutes later. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, then disappeared again. I watched the whole time as she clearly tried to figure out what to say. When she finally replied, she sounded confused and concerned, asking what I was talking about. That was the moment it truly hit me that maybe she had nothing to do with any of this. I tried to pretend like I sent the message to the wrong person, and surprisingly, she didn't question it after that, but the damage was already done in my mind. That night was the worst it had ever been. It was late, and I was sitting on my bed in the dark when the doorbell rang. It came out of nowhere and made my heart jump. I stayed still for a few seconds before getting up and walking downstairs with all the lights still off. Yes, I had been living in darkness for days. I stood near the door without opening it just to listen. The person on the other side must have heard me because they told me to open the door. Not asked, told me. I told them I didn't order anything. The voice on the other side became more aggressive, telling me to open the door like it wasn't a request anymore. I didn't respond. I just backed away and quietly went upstairs. Then I locked myself in my room. They rang the doorbell over and over for a full minute. I was hiding in my bed like a coward. After a minute or two, they stopped. I went to stay with my parents for a few days, not telling them the real reason because I didn't want to explain my creepy behavior. The rest of the time working with Emily in class was very awkward. I never found out if she sent her family or friends or whoever to my house. If it wasn't her, I have no idea who it could have been. No matter what, I never went near her house again or stalked her page again. Whoever had been coming to my house lost interest after I spent about 5 days at my parents' house. I got a taste of my own medicine, and I never want that to happen again. 2 years ago, I was what you would call lost in life. I had no direction. I worked dead-end jobs, had no relationships, and just drifted through life. Something was missing from my life. I tried filling that emptiness with many different things, but I always felt empty until one day I did something strange. Something that gave me a huge rush. I trespassed into a house in my neighborhood. Don't worry, I know how creepy this sounds. Basically, I knew the owners of the house, and I knew they were at work that day, earlier that morning. Some workers had gone to their house to do a construction project. I just happened to see them leave for lunch while I was on a walk. I don't know what came over me, but I walked the front door and checked if it was locked, and it wasn't. I walked inside and gave myself a tour of their home. The rush of being inside someone else's house felt exciting. I stayed there for several minutes and left before the construction workers returned. After that day, I started breaking into empty homes just for the thrill. I never stole anything. I would simply walk around and look at people's living spaces. I would feel this strange rush just standing inside a room, just knowing I was there while the owners had no idea. It felt amazing to me. But just like every other thing I used to fill the emptiness in my life, this also became boring over time. That strange rush eventually disappeared. Knowing I was inside the house stopped being enough. I needed more. I started calling myself a reverse thief. I would enter these homes and leave something behind, something small that didn't stand out much. Even though I would never see their reactions myself, I imagined how they would react. For example, one time I left a folded blanket on a living room couch, a blanket I brought with me, not one already in the house. The thought of the conversations that would happen made me almost excited, like a little kid on Christmas. Looking back, I know how twisted this was. If I came home and found something like that, I would probably panic and call the police. This reverse thief thing became my whole life. I planned my entire week around it. I started watching people closely. Once I learned their schedules, I would find a house and figure out a weak spot to enter while nobody was home. You would be surprised how many people keep a key under a doormat or inside one of those fake rocks that hold spare keys. It was only a matter of time before I became a real nightmare. I started becoming very dark. To show you how messed up I was, I'll tell you this small story. One time, I left a big pink hair tie and an eyeshadow pencil in the bathroom of a house. I hid in a bush beside the house and waited for the couple to come home from work. I needed to hear their reaction. The woman came home first, and she was not happy. Her husband got home shortly after, and they started arguing. He clearly had no idea what she was talking about, but the evidence was sitting right there. Can you imagine coming home and finding something like that? I'm sure it wouldn't end well for anybody. I became this mischievous little monster, and I loved it. It was only a matter of time before I got a taste of my own medicine. One afternoon, when I got home from work, I noticed something on the kitchen counter. It was a small vase with one yellow flower inside. This was definitely not there when I left that morning. Beside the vase was a note. It was written in cursive and said, "We know it was you." I felt sick. I checked all the locks, and everything seemed locked. I couldn't think of anyone who could have done this to me. I was always very careful not to leave behind any clues. That night, I went to my bedroom and locked the door. Calling the police wasn't an option because if this person really knew who I was, they could ruin my life. I thought about staying at my parents' house, but that sounded like a headache I didn't want to deal with. That night, I did a lot of thinking. I decided it was time to stop my reverse thief game forever. I woke up the next morning expecting another surprise. Thankfully, there was nothing. I ran some errands, and when I returned home, I wasn't so lucky. This time, another surprise was waiting for me. Once again, there was a note on the counter beside a dead bird. The note said, "We're coming for you." At that moment, I ran to my bedroom and started packing a bag. I was going to stay at my parents' house until I could come up with a plan. When I got to my room, I heard something moving. It wasn't coming from the room. I heard something through the vent. I walked over and pressed my ear against the vent on the floor. I could hear movement coming from the basement downstairs. There was no doubt in my mind that someone was down there. While listening, I could hear voices, but they were too muffled to understand. At least I thought they were voices. I slowly stood up. I tried not to make any noise, even though I had already been home for several minutes. I grabbed my bag and slowly walked toward the door. Every step felt loud. Every time I thought I heard something, I froze. Once I realized it was nothing, I continued moving slowly. I reached the front door, which was right beside the basement door. My curiosity was killing me. I wanted to know who was messing with me and who might be inside my house. I opened the basement door. I could hear quiet voices talking. I was sure they were voices now. As I took one step onto the creaky wooden stairs, I heard a loud shoo. I shouted down the stairs, but nobody answered. I knew I had heard voices just 3 seconds earlier. I was too scared to go down there and check, especially if there was more than one person. I turned around and slammed the basement door shut. I quietly crept out of the house. I got into my car and kept looking back at the house to see if anyone followed me, but nobody did. I drove to my parents' house and told them I needed to stay there for a few days because the landlord at my place was fixing plumbing problems. I stayed there for a week. After going that long without more strange gifts or notes, I thought it might finally be safe to return home and see if anyone was still there. While staying at my parents' house, I also contacted my landlord and asked if I could end my lease 1 month early, and he agreed. I planned on living with my parents for the next month while I packed my things, just in case those visitors came back. When I returned to the house to start packing, the first thing I noticed was that the front door was unlocked and wide open. I know I didn't lock it when I left, but I definitely closed it. The next thing I noticed was that they had left several more gifts in the kitchen. Another dead bird, more flowers, and a little toy car that looked exactly like my car. I went to the bedroom and listened carefully at the vent. I didn't hear anything, so I went to the basement door, opened it, and started yelling down there. No sound at all. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case and went down to the basement. Nobody was there. For a brief moment, I felt relieved. I thought maybe they figured out I had left for good, and because of that, they had gone away. At least that's what I hoped. But I wasn't to take any risks. I grabbed a few important things and ran to my car. I just didn't want to stay there anymore. Since I still had a month to move out, taking everything right then would have been a waste of time. I backed out of the driveway, and as I put the car into drive, I saw something. Directly across the street stood an older couple, not extremely old, maybe in their 50s or 60s. I had never seen these people before, which by itself wasn't strange. What made it strange was that the older woman waved at me, and I noticed a small yellow flower in her hand. It looked like the same kind of flower that had been left in my kitchen. The man beside her didn't do anything. He just stood there watching me. I didn't interact with them at all. I slammed on the gas and drove away. I looked in the mirror one time as I sped down the street, and I could still see them staring in my direction on the drive back to my parents' house. I took a different route. I didn't see them following me, but now I was paranoid. I spent the next few weeks scared of everything. Every sound made me jump. Every person who got too close made me think they were trying to grab me. I can honestly say this experience changed me forever. The day I got that first flower was the end of my reverse thief life. To this day, I have never been caught. But even more disturbing to me is that I still have no idea who broke into my house and why. If it really was that older couple, I honestly have no idea who they were. The only thing I know for sure is that crime doesn't pay because sooner or later, you always get what's coming to you one way or another.